Okay, sorry.
Hello and welcome to the Coach's Cup. I am Sonya Green, and today I have a special guest with me, someone whom, and Sarah, I didn't ask you about this before we started recording, but is it okay to tell them how we met?
Sure.
Okay, so Sarah was one of my interviewees as I was doing research for imposter syndrome. I really meant to ask you that beforehand, totally forgot. But anyway, we had one of those conversations that just kind of stuck in my head. And I wanted to bring her to you so that we could talk a little bit about her experience with imposter syndrome. And I think she's got some really good information to share with everybody today. So, Sarah, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Okay. I am I always feel a little awkward, little moments. So there we are. I'm a potter and an educator. I live in New Hampshire and I'm an instructor at Dartmouth Student Workshops. I'm a ceramics instructor and I have been a potter for not quite 30, yeah, about 30 years, I guess I'd say. And I exhibit all over and I teach workshops. So that's primarily been what I do. And I live in an old barn and with
In
my
New
cat and my
Hampshire.
dog
It
in New
sounds
Hampshire.
it sounds
Yeah.
like the perfect life, for somebody from the South. And then
Oh, sure.
we've talked a little bit about the difference in that, about who has snow and who has flowers, but it's still, I think I would trade it at least for one winter.
Absolutely.
So, Sarah, tell us when you first heard the term imposter syndrome, because then I'm going to go back and ask you about your first experience with it. But like most people, you didn't hear about your first experience, you didn't name it imposter syndrome. So tell us when you first heard of the term imposter syndrome.
I want to say I may be wrong, but I'm going to credit Jill Angie actually, because I'm part of her Run Your Best Life group. I
Mm-hmm,
joined that coaching group, and she's out of the life school with Brooke Castillo.
mm-hmm,
And I believe that was when I first heard it, talking specifically about someone who maybe hadn't defined herself as athletic because you didn't fit the physical model that was being shown, or just self-definition wasn't there. So
mm-hmm.
I think that, and so for me, that might have been when I started hearing that term. And then you talked about it so cogently that I wanted to talk further about it with you. But I think it was
So,
5 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years
okay.
ago.
So
That's my,
actually pretty late in your career then.
oh Lord, yes. I
Yeah.
mean, I have certainly known the term, I would say, and sort of I've developed ways of dealing with the feeling over my lifetime,
Mm-hmm.
but actually having something, some box to put it in
Yeah.
has been fairly recent, I would say.
Okay. Well, then go back and tell us when you first encountered it.
Oh, well, we had talked about this a little bit before. When I was 16, well, when I was 15, I worked on a schooner. I grew up on the coast of Maine, and there were these schooners that would take out, honestly, it's not totally clear because it's decades ago now, but maybe 20, 30 people. And I worked in the galley, in the kitchen, and I was at 16 hired as a cook. Now, I didn't have any real experience except insofar as working as an assistant, like a galley cook washing dishes. And so there I was being asked to feed these people who, that was the main source of entertainment, and I thought, oh my goodness, who am I to do this? And I screwed up all the time. Let me be clear. Like, it wasn't a smooth thing, but I had to show up. Like the day I made the stew where I didn't know you should take the fat off the top, and I served it and no one ate it, and then the captain had to take me aside. I had to show up the next week and
Yeah.
still do that job. So I had to come up with a way, like I cried and I felt terrible. And I had to come up with a way of talking to myself that would allow me to show up. And it was very rocky. And I thought, who am I to do this? But that was sort of I would say the very first moment. And truly, I wasn't completely prepared.
Yeah.
At the time. But that was the first time that I felt like, oh my God, who am I to do this? This is crazy.
So why do you think you did keep going? Because I think, I talked a couple of weeks ago about the difference between having a lack of confidence and imposter syndrome. And one of the big things that I see is that people with imposter syndrome, they do find a way to keep going.
I have one of those mothers who was determined to raise strong women. And she was an educator until, maybe, I'm trying to think, maybe 6 years ago. And now, as a fellow educator, we've had many interesting conversations over the years, and she's been a tremendous support to me as I have worked in that field in some fashion. And like what she unpacked for me that I promise it'll circle around. What she would do when she teaches all levels, has taught all levels, but she would say to people, you are so gifted. I know you can do this. Whether or not she saw evidence of that in the person, she would see a spark. And she would help them unpack that. And now, looking back at my childhood, I'm like, oh, like I never had a doubt that the expectation was that I was going to reach my highest potential. I don't mean that like there were repercussions of any evil thing, but like her saying, I know you can do this, and her sort of providing that idea, because she was not a good cook. Let me be clear. Like that was not part of her self-definition, but I knew that I was smart and that I'd had lots of, I was fortunate. I was in a person who fit the particular, whatever rubrics they were using at the time. So I thought I can do this. Just like I think most of us have that feeling when we're like learning to drive and it doesn't go so well. And we're like, okay, I know, at least if we're fortunate enough to have a sense of self, have been helped. And I was. And so I think for me, I knew, even though I was devastated, I also knew that I could do it, that I was strong, and I was building that sense of strength at the time. And again, I'm very fortunate. I don't want to understate the fact that I had a verbal support. A lot.
Yeah.
So that helped.
Well, and that may be one of the pieces of it, right? The
I
fact
think so.
that, because with a lack of evidence available, someone to believe in us may be that other key piece.
Yeah. It's so interesting. I think about how, for me, the way, if I think about through lines, that the way I have, when I felt like an utter imposter, which is so often, after I worked at on the schooner, and I then for 2 summers, and then I went into restaurant cooking. Again, I was quite young, and I worked, the woman who owned the restaurant, who hired me because she said, I know anyone who has done this job can do anything. She became a mentor to me when I was thinking about college and what I was going to do. One of the things she said to me was, and I came back to it maybe 10 years later when I was applying to graduate school, actually, was she said, you're an artist. I know this. I see that about you. That moment, those gifts that we as adults can give to someone else I have been the recipient of so much generosity, and that has helped me.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
love that.
we it's how this is a slight tangent, but it's part of when my friends started having babies,
Hmm.
in my primarily my 20s and 30s, and I thought, oh my God, and they start talking about things. And I don't have a child. I've never really wanted to have a child. I
Hmm.
enjoy them. I enjoy other people's. And I think, well, who am I to talk about this child? And then I think I can listen and I can tell my friend what a great job I think they're doing, because there is an aspect that
Yeah.
is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I love that for so many reasons. That is actually why I decided that when I was retiring from the university that I wanted to go into coaching, because advising students, being able to help them through that transition period was absolutely my favorite thing that I did. And coaching is very much like that, in that we get to look at people's, and many times they tell us things about themselves that they would never tell others. And we get to know them and we get to lift them up from the places they're in simply by what we see in them. And so, yeah, I love that. I think that's awesome. And, for our listeners, that take those opportunities to build young people up. We hear so much negative in the media about millennials and Gen Z, and let me tell you, there are some fantastic young people out there, and they might be just ready for a word from you. And it does a lot of good for you too, right? When you can give back to somebody like that.
I feel like one of my great privileges is to work with, I mean, I love working with all ages, but I
Mhm.
adore working with college students. I
Yes.
love teaching workshops. I always, you're right. I feel like I am lifted up,
Yeah.
absolutely, by that energy and by the promise and
Yeah.
by the just brilliance,
Yes.
because they see things differently. And part of what I have to do is actually be quiet and listen hard to what they're saying and
Hmm.
see if there's I can help them, because it's not like I'm going to dump and go.
Yeah.
It's like,
That becomes patronizing.
it is exactly. It's
Yeah.
condescending. It's
Yes.
just, no one wants that.
Right.
We
Yes.
know it when other people talk to us, but
Hmm.
if we treat people with respect, which, imperfect because human, but it is amazing. My current job, I work, students come in, they're not taking these classes for credit. It's been a long time since I've taught classes which people are taking for credit. And that was a different contractual relationship.
Hmm.
They had to do this. They wanted to, but to some extent, I felt, and I do believe this very strongly, that I needed to take them through something that was um, comparable to any other university, so that they understood what the level was.
Sure.
Whereas now I have the privilege of meeting them where they are and encouraging them
Hmm.
to learn this field. Ceramics is very challenging. It's like you look on YouTube, it looks really easy, and then you do it and you're like, holy moly, this is harder than I thought. And then my job is to say, yeah, it is good for you, and helping them notice when they're making progress. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, which is a little I think off what we're talking about, but that just thinking about that.
No, I think there are certainly applications of that to our lives as well. Having that awareness and being able to say, yeah.
Uh,
So go ahead. No, go ahead.
you had asked about uh imposter syndrome, and I was going to go to an example fairly recently this past
Sure.
year. Would you like me to?
Absolutely.
So I received I was a master artist in 2022, and which was a wonderful honor. It was amazing. And first I was so delighted. And then I thought, oh my goodness, who am I to offer this workshop? Like they said, no, you get to do whatever you want. And I thought, oh, okay. And I went through a spiral of, oh my goodness, is it I'm so happy to do this, and I'm so scared. And even as, like, my intellectual self is like, yeah, why not me? I am of a particular level. I've done certain things, and I have a pretty healthy ego. I'm around my work. I have a good ego, but the preparation I had to do to give a lecture that was going to be filmed, and a workshop, was I had to allow myself to dream, like take away my ego, just sort of put that aside, and talk to people I trusted, like talk out loud. I have a dear friend who is a mentor to me, and then has become a friend. So in that time, she saw me when I was, before I went to graduate school. So she was the director of this ceramic arts facility I worked at, Watershed. And she helped me at that time and became a friend. So I could talk to her and be naked and say, oh my God, what am I going to do? Let me tell you what I'm thinking about, and talk a lot. And we could sort of look at it. And I talked to her, and then I sort of went into I think my musician partner would call it woodshedding, like go into my head and sort of write out everything I was going to do, and create like little moments where deadlines where I had to figure out things, so that I was prepared ahead of time. I had, I did my slide lecture for myself, and then I did it again, and then I put it aside. I figured out, I showed up early to the place I was going to, at this was the Huntington Museum. They have a Walter Gropius Master Artist Series. And I did, it's an amazing program. And I showed up early. They let me do that. And I prepared, and I got into my head, and I gave myself that space to be like, no, my job is to show up as that master artist, to take that on, to believe them, to actually take that and say, yes, someone else believes it. I'm going to believe the best about me and not question it in this moment. I can do whatever I need to privately. I can go to my hotel room, and I can do whatever I need to. I can schedule a call with a friend if I need to, and say whatever went wrong or whatever went right. I can brag, I can cry, whatever. But here, I am going to be this person. So it's almost like when I do a show, when I have a big show or something, I think about my clothes very carefully. I'm putting on something where I feel most like myself, but also I feel just like really strong. And so I have, it makes me laugh. Like right now I'm talking to you, I have on this skirt, which it makes me laugh. It has dinosaurs on it that are a pattern. And it's what I wear when I'm teaching or when I'm going out, because I'm like, that's who I want to be. Yeah. I'm not, does that make sense?
No, it absolutely makes sense. Yes. So I think there is not costume and not disguise necessarily, but I think that there is, because I have a teacher outfit as well.
Yes.
And putting that on, I am ready to go into the classroom. And so, I think there's something to that.
Is your coaching outfit different than your teaching outfit? I'm curious. Or are you still, is that
I am still developing that. At first, it was the same thing. And I will tell you, it's generally a cardigan with, some kind of shell. That's my teaching outfit.
That was
And
my professor outfit.
yeah, and so it's developing. It'll be interesting to see what that is. But I happen to think, as you were talking, I had mentioned that I was going to bring up when we interviewed, you talked about how imposter syndrome makes you over prepare.
Mm-hmm.
And some people might say that what you've just described, when you went in early
Mm-hmm.
to look at the facility, to get into your head with it, some people might call that over preparing. And I wonder if that's not really fair. Um, because if it's part of the process, maybe that's something that people with imposter syndrome have figured out how to do, where people who lack confidence haven't quite made that bridge to that point yet.
I can think back to my unillustrious undergraduate college years, and I can think back to when, and this isn't, it's when I let well, I just didn't have the tools at the time
Mm-hmm.
to do a final exams. Like
Mm-hmm.
I can remember lying on the grass, reading children's books outside the library, the local library, rather than, and eating probably jelly beans, rather than studying for my exams.
Mm-hmm.
Because I thought, I don't know what to do. It's as good as it gets. And that was not a great moment. That was like my first year.
Yeah.
And and then from there, from that experience, I had to come up with better answers than
Yeah.
that. I didn't
Yeah.
fail, so it was all good, but it wasn't, it didn't work for me. Like first I thought, who am I to be here? And
Mm-hmm.
then I let myself, I think imposter syndrome in its functional setting allows you maybe be a spur to over prepare or to
Yes.
create. For me, I know that anytime I have something I value,
Mm-hmm.
like that I'm doing this of something I value, I need to create early deadlines. I
Yes.
need, so that I can go through
Mm-hmm.
this,
Mm-hmm.
and then I have enough time to put that feeling away and sort of calm myself. I mean, some people meditate, many people do, and then I can come in. So it's sort of like I have to do this ahead. I do it with work. I
Mm-hmm.
always show up. Days I'm teaching, I'm not stressed about teaching. I get a little hyped up
Yeah.
because it matters to me,
Mm-hmm.
but I always show up early. So yes, I think it is. It's process. For me, it's like, I am not a production potter. I am a person who's a studio potter who might do in a really big year when I'm not teaching, I'm just working in my studio. That's 300 pots. So I don't make like it's my process. And I do think, I mean, there are gifts of age, which I found really condescending. Let me be clear. Well, my partner and I was talking about this. I think everyone, we are where we are, but at this point, I'm in my 50s. I know myself a little better because I've fallen, I've picked myself up.
Yes.
God.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a gift that
It,
I've
it
been
absolutely is. I agree 100%. Yes.
anyway. I'm not sure where I was going with that, but we'll leave it there.
Well, so I could continue this conversation all day, but to kind of start to wrap it up, tell me advice for women who are still trying to figure out how to overcome their imposter syndrome. What advice do you have for them?
Listen to the people who've told you something about yourself that you were discounting. Positive. If someone said to you, oh my God, you are so gifted at this, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
take it, file it away. for those moments.
Mhm.
And I don't mean believe other people other than yourself. I don't mean that. I need to be extremely clear with that. But I think that we, especially people socialized as women, and not that I know men who have this too, but that we discount, we're socialized to discount praise. And I think sometimes in those moments when we're like, who am I to do this? We need to have a little box or a piece of paper. Maybe you need to write down, sit down every day and figure out, like when you're about to do something big and scary, sit down and like write out those times when someone said, you're good at this, or, oh, that's really unusual. Take that in and believe it.
Yes.
That's why I talk to my friend Holly. That's what my mentor, I have certain friends when I need help picking myself up, but I also keep those in my head.
Yeah. Yeah. And having a mentor, I mean, that's one of those great pieces of advice for overcoming imposter syndrome is finding a mentor, usually someone who looks like you, who as much as they possibly can, because we tend, for whatever reason, we tend to believe them more. We tend to see ourselves reflected in them more. But absolutely finding a mentor or just thinking back to those pieces, because we discount them every day. It's
Yeah, and for me, it's so interesting. I've thought a little bit about, for me, when I think about people who've served as that, they're probably 15 years older than me, 10 to 15.
right.
They're a little further on the path,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not, I can understand them. And you're right, like in the arts, I mean, it's really interesting. Like I think about that, I'm like, oh, when might I think about, like slowing down or changing? And I look to my friend and I think, maybe then.
Absolutely. It's so important, and we discount that sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other pieces of advice?
Well, the other thing is, I listen to people all the time. Like I have you in my head. I have other people in my head. Like when I work in the studio, and
Absolutely.
I like to, I've had periods in my life when when I was leaving a teaching job and I was setting up my own studio, I would, at the time, podcasts weren't so much of a thing, but I would have a diet of, like, I would choose a book that I was reading in the mornings. It might have been Mary Oliver poems, but it was something that was getting my head in the space where I could show up
Yes.
as that person I needed to be.
Yes.
And that, for some people, that's movement. But it's like really paying attention to what helps you feel strong.
Yeah. What
And
feeds you?
what feeds you, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And so I think it could be a podcast, it could be a book, it could be a church service, whatever that may be. I think we get these whispers. You just have to tune into them.
Yes.
And it's a process, Lord knows.
Absolutely, it is. But we, remembering back to my 30s, to my 20s,
Yeah.
I didn't think I had time to pay attention to things like that. That's not productive. That's not a good use of my time. And it absolutely is. If I had figured that out 20 or 30 years ago, I mean, who knows? The world might not be able to put up with me now. But seriously, it's, finding those things that feed us and understanding that that's an important part of who we are. I think that's fantastic advice. You said one other thing during the interview, and I told you I was going to bring this up. So I'm just going to kind of drop it out there and let you go with it. One of the really the key quotes that I wrote down when we were talking about imposter syndrome, you said, so much we do isn't measurable. And I thought that was just really important, especially uh, as women, not just women, certainly. But can you talk a little bit about what you meant by that and how that plays into imposter syndrome?
Yeah. I'm gonna take it right now. I think about it as a, it's funny. When I'm have my educator hat on, like
Mm,
when I teach a workshop or I teach a short class, I I can feel like I'm engaged.
mhm,
Things are happening, but I don't have and I can hopefully remember that, but memory is fleeting.
mhm,
I unless I write down what I've done or how that felt, I whether or not I can look back on that or I can count on that is or whether or not people have the time to give me feedback.
mhm.
I have come these days, I have come to ask for it pretty um and this is a two-edged sword, I will say, because I was just looking at Cara Lowenthal has, I haven't listened to it yet, but a podcast about how women say, is that okay?
Uh-huh.
What is that a good idea? So
Mhm,
I'm well aware of this being a two-edged sword,
mhm,
but like I taught my most recent longer scale workshop was last spring, where people came up to me and said, "Oh my gosh, this was great." And I hold on to that in my head when I'm teaching right now. Like yesterday, I taught a workshop with four, mostly beginners, and I think, okay, I'm going to hope, I'm going to have to believe that this is, I'm dropping a stone into a pool and there's going to be ripples that are going to
mhm.
change something. But I've come to that um, over the years. I did not know when I was teaching. I felt like I had to be such a hard ass when I was a young professor. I
Mhm.
had so much to prove because I felt like I was not good enough. I was a last minute hire. Who the heck was I to be teaching? And I had no way of knowing what I didn't know. People weren't, at the time, people weren't really into giving lots of positive feedback. It was really about, um, well, you didn't get fired. That's good. You know?
Right.
So I have had to come up with my own systems of measurement.
Mhm.
Um, and that it's funny. Um, I, I also I'm a potter of a certain level. Like I'm known, I'm not super famous. I don't know, maybe under demi famous. Certain
Uh,
people know about me, but I have had, I have been invited to shows that I respected, that I wanted to be part of, that I felt like were the top of the field
mhm,
in what I do. And so when I don't know, when I feel like, who am I? That's my measurement
mhm.
because there isn't a measurement.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like there isn't a book. There's not a Debrett's book of
Right.
peerage.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So it's as with I think all the good things, it's a messy and imperfect process. And
Mhm.
it and I love that
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah. Because you get to make it work for you, right?
You have to.
Mhm.
And I mean that in a non-scary way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and in a creative way, an opportunity to build yourself, to create yourself kind of way.
I had this student, I was starting my current job, but it was like I was really young to it and I didn't know the students. I didn't know them well. And I was telling the student how I meant it to be like this very inspiring speech. And I was like, she's gonna run with this. So I told her how amazing it was that you get to be a beginner potter for like 15 years. Because this
Uh-huh.
potter told me that, and I thought, oh, this is great. And this student was like, oh my God, well, then why would I do it? And I thought, oh, okay, that was exactly wrong for this moment and this person. And I've had other students where that was exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very interesting because for me, that takes away imposter syndrome. It's like, oh no, I get to be imperfect. I don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
I am exactly right. But for her, I mean, of course, she was 21,
Mm-hmm.
and and very, someone who had been very successful,
Uh-huh.
at the time. So it was really interesting. I had to sort of, after that moment, I had to like pull in deep and not and sort of take out my own tools and be like, it's okay, that dropped. You're still, I had to think about what are my sort of, how do I manage myself? I
Mm-hmm.
talk to colleagues, how am I not an imposter?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think a big thing with imposter syndrome is understanding we don't have to worry about measuring our effect on anyone else, whether it's our students, anyone. It's about us. People are going to take from us. They're going to take things that we never remember saying, that we said off the cuff,
all the
which is
time.
yeah, which is really important to remember. I mean, that's a lesson I had to learn. Sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad, but we can't give somebody something and know that they will take it and it will have the same meaning. We have to show up for us, what's important for us, and they will figure out what they need.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Sarah, this has been it's time has flown by, but I have enjoyed it so much. Any last words you want to share with the audience?
Oh, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you wanting to have this conversation.
It's been
And
totally my pleasure.
I very much, uh, you are, enough. And that keeps on changing.
Yes. Awesome. All right. Well, we'll see you all next week. In the meantime, if you're looking for coaching or if you want to take my new quiz that I have on my website, it's a big pink button on the top right-hand corner. It says imposter syndrome question mark, or have imposter syndrome question mark. Then you can pop on over to sonyagreencoaching.com and take that. And I'll see you next week. Thanks, Sarah.
Welcome.